I am here with another quote diagnosis video, and for today's quote diagnosis, I have picked Akira Kurosawa. So, who was Akira Kurosawa? He was a film director and screenwriter. Where was Akira Kurosawa raised? Oimachi, in the Omari district of Tokyo. What were the thematic concentrations Akira Kurosawa focused on? 1. The master-disciple relationship. 2. The heroic champion. 3. The recurrence of cycles of savagery. Okay, now to get into the quotes. The first quote. In a mad world, only the mad are sane. So, it's pretty straightforward, but what I take from this quote is that Akira Kurosawa is, making a commentary on, well, not really a commentary as much as an observation of, the world the way he sees it. Everybody, for the most part, the majority of the world, well, the majority of the people that make up the peopled representation of the world are, loopy, so to speak, and thus, if you're not like them, you're sane. They would call you mad, and you're sane. Anyway, it's pretty simple, that one. Next quote. Man is a genius when he is dreaming. So, how I interpret this quote, session 2 at this quote, is that, when you are having a dream, when you're asleep, your focus, it tends to perceive things that far surpass the creative perceptions of when you're awake, when you're in an awakened state. So, so I guess what Akira Kurosawa is saying here is that, a person is genius when they're dreaming, when they have no filters on, and so it's sort of a comment on how, true, genius or true originality or what have you along that line is, it comes from, an absence of filters. So you see more, thus, you can invent because you see so much that you can make something new. Anyway, that's the way I take that quote. Next quote. To be an artist means never to avert one's eyes. So, what I take Akira Kurosawa to be saying here is that to be an artist in the sense of, somebody pursuing a creative endeavor, that is also a meaningful endeavor, and not just for them, but for the wider society. So someone you would typically think of as an artist, if you had hierarchy in mind. You might think of, like, Pablo Picasso, or you might think of, in the literary world, William Faulkner, but anyway, you get my point. Somebody who you would think of as an artist if you had hierarchy in the back of your mind while thinking of the label artist. And so what Akira Kurosawa is saying here, in my opinion, is that, you know, to be an artist perceived in hierarchy means, you would have, or you will have to, never avert your eyes. You have to actually, like that Nietzsche quote, gaze into the abyss. You have to, again, not have a filter for what you are observing, and thus, impressing upon, and expressing, and detailing and all that. Anyway, next quote. People today have forgotten they're really just a part of nature, yet they destroy the nature on which our lives depend. They always think they can make something better, especially scientists. They may be smart, but most don't understand the heart of nature. They only invent things that, in the end, make people unhappy. Yet they are so proud of their inventions. What's worse, most people are too. They view them as if they were miracles. They worship them. They don't know it, but they're losing nature. They don't see that they're going to perish. The most important things for human beings are clean air and clean water. So, how I interpret section 2 this quote by Akira is that he's saying that, there is, he references the heart of nature, and metaphorically speaking, when we metaphysically talk about heart, what people generally tend to mean when they use that is a replacement term for connection, for like a one point connecting to another point, point of view. So point of view connection. And what Akira is saying is basically that, the more blind progressions, so the more progressions that are made that are blind to that heart of nature, so that are blind to that point of view connection between all natural entities, so to speak, those blind progressions are going to lead to, ruin. They're going to lead to, destruction of the fabric of not just society, but community, family, peer bonding even, inevitably over time, and he makes a comment, that the most important things for human beings are clean air and clean water. And so this sort of brings to mind, that whole cleanliness is next to godliness, or next to holiness. And, you look out on the streets nowadays, and you see a lot of litter, clogging the gutters, and, well, where I live, I see some of that. And it's really upsetting, off-putting, because, think about it, like, if you are a person who, you're trying to be responsible, you're trying to be accountable for your, for your cleanliness, and you walk down the street with you finished, I don't know, a bag of lollies or whatever, and you walk down the street, and you're planning on walking to this trash can, down the street, on the corner of the street. And yet, with every footstep toward that trash can, you look in the gutter, and you see, oh, there are like a dozen other, lolly bags just like yours that somebody, that some people have just thrown in the gutter. And it makes you disheartened. So it distances you from the heart, what Akira is referring to as the heart of nature. And you're like, well, what's the point of me going and putting my rubbish lolly bag, that's empty into that trash can when all these other people who are supposedly part of my community aren't doing likewise? What's the point? It's, why shouldn't I just throw my rubbish lolly bag in the gutter with everybody else's? And so that's sort of what Akira is alluding to, is that disheartening effect. And, a lot of blind progressions, made, by, scientists, people who are supposed to be the smartest among us, a lot of blind progressions made by them actually end up disheartening, members of the community, and those members grow in number, that are disheartened. And then, it breaks down the civility that forms civilization over time. Anyway, that's how I understand that quote. Next quote. I can't afford to hate anyone. I don't have that kind of time. So, it's pretty simple what Akira is saying here, in my opinion. He's saying that, there's no point in him holding, ill will towards anybody else, because, he doesn't have, the time. I can't remember who said this, but somebody once said that, in order to hate somebody truly, you have to know them. And if you think about, like, not having enough time, to hate somebody, it could be said you don't have enough time to know somebody, or you don't have enough time to know enough people so that you actually hate somebody, and anyway, this quote just sort of made me think, that, you only have a limited number of, connections that you can make in life, where, the time is going to be right where people can, give you what you're willing to give. And so, there just aren't as many opportunities for forming connections as you may perceive ahead of time in your adolescent, your daydreaming, so to speak. Anyway, this quote just made me think of that. Next quote. This is probably true of human life everywhere. A light exterior hides a dark underside. So what I think Akira is saying here is that, ta-da, people are two-faced, a lot of people who have a very good persona, very, clean, perfect, la-da-da, nothing wrong with me persona, a lot of the time, those people are hiding, hiding the reality of, could be emotional deficiencies, could be mental deficiencies, such as, intellectual deficiencies. It could be physical deformities, you pull somebody's top up, you might see, they've got a colostomy bag. So, people who are very, pronounced in, perfection, or at least the status quo standard of perfection for the times, generally have, shit they're hiding. Anyway, that's how I read what Akira is saying here. Next quote. No matter where I go in the world, although I can't speak any foreign language, I don't feel out of place. I think of Earth as my home. If everyone thought this way, people might notice just how foolish international friction is, and they would put an end to it. So, what I think Akira is getting at with this quote is that, the world is, it's technically the home of any physical being on the earth. The earth is the home for earthlings. It doesn't matter, where you are, or where you're from, this is still earth, and if everybody thought that way, then there'd be less butting heads about, territory and all that. But, obviously this is, this is taking a simplistic view of it. I don't think that people would necessarily be out of problems, be out of interpersonal problems if, everybody thought of the whole earth as being their playground, so to speak. Or not their playground, but, their home. Because, you just think about, the way people are naturally, wired to want security, to be adequate, this natural wiring, so to speak, puts people at an odds. It puts, sorry, that's not the way to put it. It makes people competitive against one another. So there's natural competition, and as long as there's natural competition, there's going to be a hierarchy. There's going to be closed borders. Because you, as sad as it may be to realize, you can't have peace on earth and everybody gets the same level of freedom. That's just not feasible. Anyway, the next quote. Human beings have launched satellites into outer space, and yet they still grovel on Earth looking at their own feet like wild dogs. What is to become of our planet? So, what Akira Kurosawa is saying here, in my opinion, is that if people are still petty, even though they've accomplished, collectively great feats, then, what if those great achievements didn't diminish that pettiness, then what does that say about, where we are all heading as a collective? That's what I think, Akira's saying there. Next quote. Although human beings are incapable of talking about themselves with total honesty, it is much harder to avoid the truth while pretending to be other people. They often reveal much about themselves in a very straightforward way. I am certain that I did. There is nothing that says more about its creator than the work itself. So, what Akira is saying here, in my opinion, is that what one produces, it will often tell the truth that they are unwilling to speak outright. So think of it like, a painter's paintings may reveal hidden, meanings about the painter, or like, a singer-songwriter's songs can tell about the intentions maybe, or, the sentiments of the singer. Or, a novelist, their crime novel, could tell you, about an actual crime they committed 20 years ago. Who knows, But anyway, I think that's what Akira sort of commenting on, not commenting on, but like alluding to, is that art has a lot of truth in it. It has a lot. I shouldn't say truth. It has a lot of deep meaning to it. That's more apt way of putting it. Next quote. But ignorance is a kind of insanity in the human animal. People who delight in torturing defenseless children or tiny creatures are in reality insane. The terrible thing is that people who are madmen in private may wear a totally bland and innocent expression in public. So this goes back to that other Akira quote, where he mentions the light exterior, hiding a dark underbelly, so to speak. There are two-faced people in the world, and they, a lot of the people who, are pedophiles, a lot of the people who are, who, are rapists and the people who are, abusive to animals, children, right? A lot of these people, you would never think of them as being abusive. Because a lot of them are going to seem like, the perfect people, on the surface, but submerged when we dive deep into their lives, there's a lot of ugly things can start to spill out. Anyway, that's what I think Akira is saying there. Next quote. It is quiet enough if a human being has but one field where he or she is strong. If a human being were strong in every field, it wouldn't be nice for other people, would it? So, what I think Akira is pointing out is that, if we are to take that attention means a lot to every individual, then if everybody were to be like a Leonardo da Vinci, for example, or try to be like that, then that would cause a lot of conflict, because there'd be this person over here who is upset they're not getting any attention, and there's this other person over here that's upset they're not getting any attention. I disagree with this, this point of view that Akira is, seeing through. I would argue that, I would argue that every individual has the right to advance themselves in all areas of life, in all areas of interest, that remain within the boundaries of liberty. So do not infringe upon anybody else's freedoms, and so I believe that people have the right to venture forward in a very libertarian-like manner. Although I'm not a libertarian, but you can see what I'm trying to say. I believe that it's important that people recognize that a lot of the attention seeking, is just immaturity. A lot of it is, committed by people who lack consolation from their, maternal or paternal figures in their life. And so, anyway, yeah. So I disagree with the point of view of this quote, but I get what Akira is saying, essentially. Okay, next quote. Granting that there is some truth to the theory Granting that there is some truth to the theory that defects in society give rise to the emergence of criminals, I still maintain that those who use this theory as a defense of criminality are overlooking the fact that there are many people in this defective society who survive without resorting to crime. The argument to the contrary is pure sophistry. So, so what Akira is saying here, in my opinion, he's commenting from an observation that, yes, there are a lot of people who from, these defective societies, defective communities more so, there are a lot of these people, become criminals. But, Akira is also saying that, some of them don't. And then he's saying to argue against that is sophistry. In other words, you are you're sort of you're sort of manipulating the reality. And look, he's got a point. What I would say though, hopefully I don't appear as a sophist, I would say that regardless of the fact, so the perception that, people in quote-unquote defective communities, they don't all turn bad, that which makes their communities defective in the first place, it does focus people, towards turning bad. That's what I would argue, is that, there has to be a standard, for decorum, in a community, or else, people take the law into their own hands, and people are differentiated from one another. Everybody's an individual. And so different individuals have different laws. Ethics is subjective. And, though I want to add the caveat that ethics, though it is subjective, technically, it is objective. I do perceive if you are at a certain nearness in your ability to read other people expressively. So I think the better you are at reading other people's expressions, and in an effective manner, so it affects you, I think then the closer, the nearer you are to reading another's expressions in an effective manner, then ethics becomes objective at that point. But, technically speaking, if we take a 4-year-old who can't perceive a 54-year-old as a 54-year-old, then ethics is entirely subjective, given that distance of readability, so to speak, of being able to read another person. So the more distant you are from somebody else, from reading them, from reading their expressions, their emotions, so to speak, then the more subjective ethics can be said to be. But the closer you are to reading the person, the more objective it becomes. Anyway, just wanted to add that in there. But yeah, I get what Akira is saying, and it's a decent point. Next quote: "The censors were so far gone as to find the following sentence obscene. The factory gate waited for the student workers thrown open and longing. What can I say? This obscenity verdict was handed down by a censor in response to my script for my 1944 film about a girl's volunteer corps, The Most Beautiful. I could not fathom what it was he found to be obscene about this sentence. Probably none of you can either. But for the mentally disturbed censor, this sentence was unquestionably obscene. He explained that the word gate very vividly suggested to him the vagina. For these people suffering from sexual manias, anything and everything made them feel carnal desire, because they were obscene themselves. Everything seen through their obscene eyes naturally becomes obscene, nothing more or less than a case of sexual pathology." So, so what Akira is saying here is basically he's commenting on censorship, one, and then he's commenting on the difference of perception, but he's a little trapped in his own lane of perception, that he can't see how gate could be perceived to metaphorically convey a vagina, and it can be perceived that way. So I don't think just because you can perceive a gate to mean vagina metaphorically, so with some metaphysical lingo, I don't think just because you can perceive it that way makes you sexually pathological. More so, I think it's just some people are more they're more intuition based, whereas other people, and I'm assuming Akira Kurosawa to be one of them, is more interpretationally based. And so think about the difference between interpretation versus intuition. Interpretation, you need a dictionary source. You need some sort of agreed upon consensus source to say this means this. So, you look up the word gate in a dictionary and it means something different to the word vagina in a dictionary. But if you're thinking more intuition based, then you're going to be thinking more metaphorically, visually. So, and this is not sexual pathology, mind you, but you can envision, like, you can envision that the parting of the thighs is like a gate, and then there's the vagina. You get what I'm saying. It's like there's a lot of metaphor, in allegory. Like the two snakes in Heracles' crib. He strangled the two snakes. Could he have been talking about two penises? well, could the writer have been alluding to that using visual, using image-driven language? And I think that, you know, I think that what Akira is perceiving as sexual pathology is actually just, it's just, the fact that people are, that there are people who are more intuition based in their focus, and there are people who are more interpretation based in their focus. And but I agree with him that the censoring of his film, for the reason that he gave, it was ridiculous. I think that censorship. I think censorship should be based on interpretation more so than intuition. But I mean, this was in earlier times, and so if you got to give the censors of that time some slack for they were just getting into it. But I don't think I think censorship is ridiculous on principle. But because I don't think that seeing something or reading something makes you a bad person. I don't think it affects an individual in that way. Though in a world this vast and heavily populated, perhaps there is a percentage of people who it does affect in that way. But I don't know, and nobody else does, or at least they haven't produced sufficient evidence to declare that for my liking, or for a lot of people's liking. Anyway, moving on. The next quote. For me, filmmaking combines everything. That's the reason I've made cinema my life's work. In films, painting, and literature, theatre and music come together, but a film is still a film. So, yeah, this is pretty straightforward, but he's just alluding to the fact that film, it combines all these aspects of other arts, and then it's sort of an amalgam. Anyway, next quote. In the pre-war era, when itinerant home remedy salesmen still wandered the country, they had a traditional patter for selling a potion that was supposed to be particularly effective in treating burns and cuts. A toad with 4 legs in front and 6 behind would be placed in a box with mirrors lining the 4 walls. The toad, amazed at its own appearance from every angle, would break into an oily sweat. This sweat would be collected and simmered for 3,721 days, while being stirred with a willow branch. The result was the marvelous potion. When writing about myself, I feel something like that toad in the box. So, what I think Akira is, saying is that, writing about himself, it's sort of, there's some, you don't really know how to go about it. It's sort of like, it's sort of like you're part way deluding yourself in the process, because you can't give an unbiased, review of yourself. I think that's what he's getting to there. And finally, the next quote, the final quote. I suppose all of my films have a common theme. If I think about it, though, the only theme I can think of is really a question. Why can't people be happier together? Yeah, so this quote, just thinking about, like, why can't people be happy together? Why can't people be happy together? My answer would be, people would be happier together if they could work together. So, if people were under the authority of order instead of under the authority of sequence, then they could work together. And I think that's what separates a film from real life, is that, a film is under the authority of order, beginning, middle, and end. Whereas real life is under the authority of sequence. I mean, there are a lot of people who go their whole entire lives without meeting a single person who they really connect with. Think about that. And those are the people who buy the real dolls, and they put makeup on them, and they dress them in clothes, and it's like Lars and the real girl. There are so many people who go their whole entire lives, and they just are a misfit. Like that guy who slept with a dolphin. Or that guy who died because he broke into a farm and made a video of himself with a horse. It's and was rushed to the hospital and died. So I mean, there are a lot of people that they don't fit because there isn't the order. There's the sequence, but there isn't the order. Order has to be established, and it's it hasn't been established yet. Let's just put it that way. So anyway, yeah, but why can't people be happier together? Well, you need to define people, and everybody has to agree on that definition. And unfortunately, if people are misplaced in position in a community, then they're not going to be happy together because they're not going to be satisfied together. The key to a happy togetherness is satisfied togetherness. If if people aren't satisfied, they're not going to be happy. And there are other factors like the number of people in the community. It has to be sustainable. In order for well-being to occur, in order for happiness to occur, on the mutual level. There's overpopulation pertaining to existence, and then there's overpopulation pertaining to well-being. And I think the world hasn't reached overpopulation pertaining to existence yet, but it has reached overpopulation pertaining to well-being, and I think you can see the effect of that online if you look at a lot of people, who are part of the younger generations. A lot of them are depressed, and a lot of them are acting out online, and they are exempling behavior that is indicative, or suggestive of depression, of disillusion, an unfulfilled life, an unlived life, because we have overpopulation pertaining to well-being. Anyway, that's my little thought about that. So yeah, this has been the quote diagnosis for Akira Kurosawa. If you have any suggestions for any person, that you would like me to do a quote diagnosis of, leave it in the comments. And have a good day. Peace. Meow.